Hello everyone, today I'll be reviewing Back to the Future. So Back to the Future came out in 1985 and was directed by Robert Zemeckis, and this is a science fiction film. So this film stars Michael J. Fox as a high schooler called Marty McFly, and he is friends with this scientist called Doc Brown, who is played by Christopher Lloyd. And Doc Brown, obviously being a scientist, he likes to invent things, and he invents a time machine from a DeLorean. And when this DeLorean reaches 88 miles per hour, it can travel through time. It can go forward, it can go back, it can go wherever, or whenever rather. And Doc is really happy with this time machine. What ends up happening is that Marty accidentally uses this time machine to travel back to the year 1955, which was obviously 30 years before this film is set, 1985. So he travels back to 1955, and at first he doesn't realise what he's done. He walks around town, he realises that everything is different, all the cars are different, people wearing different clothes, and there's old music in the background, Mr. Sandman. And he's obviously really confused by this and realises that he needs to get back to the year 1985. While in 1955, Marty accidentally stops his parents from meeting each other and falling in love. So he has to make it his quest to get his mum and dad back together, otherwise he would have never been born. And then obviously he has to meet Doc in the year 1955 and help him travel back to the future of 1985. So I'm going to start by saying that this is probably one of my favourite films of all time. It's an absolute classic, and it's one of those films I revisit time and time again, and I always find myself enjoying and always find myself picking up on bits that I didn't realise before. And although this is a time travel film, I suppose a bit of a science fiction film, it's a lot more than that. It's a lot more accessible to a wider range of people than your typical sort of science fiction movie. Because although this film was science fiction, it has a bit of romance, it's a bit of comedy, and it has a lot more excitement that I think many other films do. It works so well because the performances are so much fun in this. I mean, Michael J. Fox is so likeable as Marty McFly. It comes across as a bit of a silly character, but also a really cool guy as well, and you really root for him throughout this film. For me, probably the standout character is the character of Doc Brown, played by Christopher Lloyd. He's a really over-the-top and crazy scientist and has some really ridiculous lines. And I have to say that this is a very quotable film. There are so many excellent quotes throughout this film, so many memorable lines that when I go back to revisit this film, I always look forward to hearing those lines over and over again. I also have to mention Thomas F. Wilson, who plays a character called Biff Tannen. And Biff is a character who appears in, well, both timelines actually, but in the year 1955, he fancies Marty's mum. And Marty's dad, who is played by Crispin Glover, he, along with Marty, they have to sort of fight off Biff in order to help Marty's dad fall in love with Marty's mum again. Although me saying this, it might sound slightly confusing, perhaps I'm not explaining it very well, it is actually a very simple film to follow. I think with a lot of films and a lot of stories that involve science fiction time travel, they can often be quite complicated to follow because of all the different timelines and the going backwards and forwards, but this film actually does it so well. It is just so easy to follow what is going on, and what is brilliant is that we get pretty much the same set of characters in 1985 as we do in 1955. So at the start of the film, we're already introduced to some of these characters, and then we travel back 30 years. We see these characters again, but obviously being younger. And it's just really interesting how seeing how they're different in each different timeline, and how different things can affect what happens in the future, and how even the tiniest thing, even the tiniest adjustment or reaction here and there can alter things going forward in ways that you can never imagine. The music in this film was also brilliant, composed by Alan Silvestri, one of those great film scores, and it was a shame that it wasn't even nominated for an Oscar because it really is fantastic music. Now I also have to mention this film did have a couple of sequels as well, Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3, and in Part 2 Marty goes forward to 2015, which is 30 years, and in Back to the Future Part 3 he goes back 100 years, 1885, to the Old West. And those films are both really enjoyable as well, have a very similar tone to this film, But I think this one is much better, to be honest. Obviously it's far more original and it just has a fantastic story. When I watched this the other day, I was surprised by how quickly it went by, and I think it's probably because I enjoy the film so much. I never find any dull moments in this film. It's always exciting from start to finish. You constantly want to know where this is going, and I remember the first time I watched it, I instantly thought, wow, this is one of my favourite films of all time, because it's just such an interesting concept of going back in time and seeing when your parents meet, and stopping your parents from meeting, and it's just those crazy sort of time travel theories and time travel questions that you can think about, and just a really amazing idea for a film, and I think it just came across so well in this movie. So if I had to say anything particularly bad about this film, I can't really think of anything. I suppose that it is very obvious when Marty goes back to 1955 that there are certain references and stuff that might seem a little bit forced, that are trying to just show the differences between 1955 and 1985, but often these things are very funny. Like I love the bit when 1955 Doc asks Marty who's president of the United States in 1985, and then Marty says Ronald Reagan, and then Doc says Ronald Reagan, the actor, who's vice president, Jerry Lewis, and it's all these sorts of funny quotes like this and these funny moments that really just make it so much fun to watch. So as you can probably tell, Back to the Future is an amazing movie. It's just a really excellent family film, just really good fun. It does have a few darker moments here and there, I probably would say, particularly towards the end of the film maybe. Bear in mind that the character of Biff, he's not a nice guy. Most of the time this is quite a light-hearted, enjoyable film with a bit of science fiction, a bit of comedy, and just a bit of everything. One of those films that manages to mix the genres really well, and yeah, just an excellent way to spend your time watching Back to the Future. So I'm going to give Back to the Future a rating of 10 out of 10. If you haven't seen this film, I highly recommend you check it out. So there we go. So that is my review of Back to the Future. So what do you guys think? Have you seen Back to the Future? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments section below. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.